In some ways, even the pollution itself is a reminder of how complicated policy actually is and how much we need to do. I'm much more comfortable with a social transfer to the poorest woman of these 10,000 schemes than I am of an economy that is growing in such a way that only 2As or 3As will profit.
Is it frustrating? Is it boring? Is it you got to stay like really disciplined 24/7?
No.
It's what I can expect from Yamini.
And if you see, how we've been talking about who is the beneficiary, we use the word Labharti now. Labharti translates as a recipient.
Yeah.
So we're not talking about a citizen who is a rightful recipient of a benefit.
Do not forget public in the policy.
You're asking the wrong person because I've been thinking the same thing. The announcements of these transfers are not part and parcel of a broader vision of what kind of society we want to build or what kind of economy we want to build. It has acquired what we call a compensatory logic. It's almost as, because I do not want to create a politics that engages with and mobilizes around these bigger ideational issues, I am compensating by giving this cash transfer. And linked to this is the question of the Indian economy that just is not generating enough jobs. Criticism in populist governments is not something that is seen as a positive contribution that can make governments better. It's seen as an anti-national act.
Hello and a warm welcome. I'm Smita Sharma. You're watching a special series of conversations that we are kicking off today, focusing on women leaders, experts. What do they want? What do they represent? The grit, the determination, their expertise on subjects that they bring to the table. Women who have broken glass ceilings, women who have made it easier for other women to follow their path. But these conversations are not just going to be about personal achievements, but really helping us understand issues that they share their expertise on. So in a world full of manuals, this is really a conversation about getting women to speak up, speak their mind, and to be heard. And I'm so glad that for this first episode, I have somebody who I call a friend and somebody I personally have a deep admiration for, Yamini Aiyar. She's been a public policy scholar for a very long time, somebody who researches, writes. You can read her in various platforms, also the author of an interesting book that you wrote after actually following the schools in Delhi. We'll come to that in just a bit. But currently, she also wears multiple hats. She is with the Brown University and other centers as well, including a visiting senior fellow at Saxena Center. Thank you so much, Yamini, for joining me here.
Thank you. It's such a privilege to be here with you again. It's been a while, but I've always enjoyed all my conversations with you, and so really looking forward to this one.
It's a mutual admiration club there. But how's it going for you? I mean, you've been shuttling global capitals, and every time you come back to the Delhi pollution or to, forget that, how has it really been?
Oh, Delhi, despite all of its pollution, is always like home, and so whatever else, it's just always exciting to be here. But in some ways, even the pollution itself is a reminder of how complicated policy actually is and how much we need to do, right? Like here is something that we are all living in a city, it's the capital of a country, and breathing this toxic air, and at some level just getting on with our lives as if it's normal. And at another, finding ways of coping, which are creating a bigger problem, right? Like we are sitting in here, and of course we have air purifiers because we can afford to. And it sort of is a reminder of how so much about, what most societies take for granted or what governments do, these basic public goods. In India, if you can afford to, you seek to privatize. And now we have reached the point where we've even privatized the purest of public goods. I never thought you could privatize your air, but we've managed that also. So those with privilege can breathe, and those without privilege have to live with the toxic air. And yet we are not able to figure out how to solve the problem, how to generate the effective political will, and how to bring government, society, and all of us together to find an answer. It's quite something.
Bottled drinking water to, in a way, actually bottled air when you talk about the air purifiers. I always kind of, think that I really don't have a business acumen. When I saw the pandemic and people getting into the mask business, I should have invested, in the mask business, picked up a few stocks of air purifiers somewhere, never do that in time. I mean, how do women actually sort of challenge their own financial acumen? Any word of advice before we get on to our main subjects?
You're asking the wrong person because I've been thinking the same thing.
साथ मिलकर ही कुछ कर लेते हैं अब यार ऐसे तो just keep missing out on the business opportunities. But anyways, what you started off with, and it's interesting because while there is so much of hue and cry, public protests, governments continue to either remain in denial or very thick-skinned or try and treat cancer with migraine pills. And it brings home the main question that, on one hand, while governments are willing to transfer so much of cash and other stuff towards women in elections, but really issues that will matter and impact women directly when it comes to their core health of their family, these will not become political issues or issues of elections, do you think? Or is it really specific to some states in India, not so much in others? What is it that doesn't allow these issues to become issues that are drivers in elections?
You've asked a very difficult question. It's so fundamental, and yet we don't have a good answer to offer with any certainty. What is it that generates certain kinds of issues become issues of electoral competition and become part and parcel of how the public debates them, and then certain things just get hidden. In fact, let's stay with pollution for a moment, but I always felt that in a country where we've privatized so much, right? Like the elite essentially live in kind of bubbles of our own. We privatized our education, we've privatized our health, we've frankly privatized even our roads, we've privatized law and order. And, you go to any posh colony in Delhi, or for that matter, any big city in India, and you'll see private security guards. We kind of live in a little enclave separate to the state. And there is the rest of the country that is hugely dependent on the state. And I always thought that perhaps there's one thing that might change that, because how do we actually generate social change if elites who have outsized voice and power on how public opinion is shaped, how politics is shaped. If we start demanding things, maybe there will be some change. And I always thought something like pollution would be that final kind of straw which would break the camel's back, and we'd see a big push. And we're still not there. We just found yet another private solution to what is a serious public problem. So what is it that generates political will is a hard question to ask. But I think that, often we will take what we get in some senses, right? Like, why is it that air pollution is not an electoral issue in a city like Delhi? We just had an election earlier this year. And, the classic answer will be, it isn't because janta nahi mangti, people don't want it. Tell me one person walking on the street who would say, I don't want clean air. We all want it. But it doesn't become an electoral issue because it's simply not as on the menu of choices that our electors present to us during an election. And we have to find ways of continuously generating that public pressure. And that really requires a much more mature public discourse, which I think we lack across many issues. So even when it comes to the issue of women and elections, right? The election in Bihar has just sort of brought up all over again the cash transfer of 10,000 rupees that was offered to women. And how do we debate it in the public sphere? We are debating it in kind of two axes. One axis is to say, oh, these are just freebies and bribes, which I find deeply problematic because you're reducing what is essentially a process process of political negotiation to something that is that's almost like a power that the elector has over the voter. It's stripping agency over the voter by suggesting that these are bribes. And on the other hand, there's a defense of the cash transfer as something that can offer things. But it isn't offer. But that defense never speaks of it in terms of solidarity or or sort of a collective imagination of what we as a society can be. We are not talking about critical issues of redistribution, which are at the heart of these things. So we've just started debating these issues in ways that create all these false binaries, and that make it and that almost prevent us from getting to the crux of what is our imagination of the kind of society we want to be, and how do we build solidarity across members of this society. And that means asking and trying to answer very difficult questions about, redistribution, about justice. In all of this, there is going to be degrees of give and take. And if we don't allow our public discourse to engage with these questions, by quickly, reducing everything to freebies, bribes, raveries, or whatever the word we like to use, the chances that we will be able to pressure our politics to become more genuine are pretty low. So I think a lot of the onus rests on what we ask, what kinds of questions we ask, what kind of demands we place on our on the power structures that shape our society, and how we collectively seek to contribute to it.
You've raised a lot of issues, and I'm going to pick up one thread at a time. Also talk a little bit in detail about women electors and women participants in Bihar. But starting with, coming to this 10,000 rupees transfer that happened to the Jivika Didis community mobilizers in Bihar, which was being looked upon as definitely a very important tipping point in favor of the NDA. Otherwise, it could have been a much more level playing ground. Do you call it a freebie? Do you call it a welfare scheme? This is, something that you work on constantly. How do you define it to begin with?
Look, I call it a social transfer. Okay, I hate the word freebie because it seems to suggest that there is that there are those in society who are economically productive and who are generating wealth, and there are those in society who are the takers. And I think that is exactly the wrong way to debate the complex question of how do we ensure equitable distribution of societal wealth. There are many reasons why there are certain actors in society who are productive contributors to the economy. And a lot of those reasons have to do with the unfair and unequal distribution of resources in society in the first place. So I am I'm much more comfortable with a social transfer to the poorest woman of these 10,000 schemes than I am of an economy that is growing in such a way that only 2As or 3As will profit. I mean, in that, or when, and I always ask the question, why is it that corporate tax breaks or middle class tax breaks, that was this budget, are treated as virtuous cycles? That's good economics. This is going to create a virtuous cycle of demand in the economy, and a transfer of taxpayers' resources to poor women are described as freebies. So I've been struggling with what is the best way to talk about this, and I think of it as a social transfer.
I mean, for me, the more problematic area, honestly speaking, it's not really about the schemes per se. I mean, if they're well-intentioned schemes, if they're bringing about a change in the family, the village, I would welcome that. For me, it's really about the timing and the long-term intention.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Whether it's a Ladki Bahin in Maharashtra, which we saw it completely being pushed off on different pretexts once the elections were done and dusted with, whether it is cylinders or buses to women in Telangana, in Hyderabad. So, or I don't know, how much of a follow-up will happen really on that promise of a 2 lakh rupees to those who can come up with a business idea, which was done in Bihar. So that I think complicates the
No,
situation.
no, absolutely. I mean, I emphasize the freebies only because I think words matter, and we use these words very loosely, and they prevent us from actually asking the more substantive question that you have posed, right? Because we get caught in this. These are all just bribes, and then you don't get an opportunity to really say, well, actually, how should we think about social transfers and constructing a welfare state that is genuinely empowering, and that gets to the heart of what you are pointing to. If you look at the history of India's welfare, right? Like, I mean, your listeners may remember the days of Jayalalitha and the gas, not the gas, the mixers and grinders, the TVs, the mass weddings, the saris. I mean, this kind of welfare benefit has been part and parcel of the structure of the Indian welfare state. I mean, there's a long history to it, and we can get into the weeds of that. But I think what is happening today is substantively different, and it does require us to pay attention to two very crucial things, which is why we need to get away from calling them freebies and actually say what kind of welfare state are we building. The first crucial thing is that we are talking about cash transfers in the context of technology. The DBT structure, direct benefit transfers, which effectively is about transferring money without having the intermediaries of the state, which it's an infrastructure that was built up on the back of the legitimate argument that the Indian state is deeply corrupt, and that in that corruption, layers of funds that should go to the rightful beneficiary of a welfare scheme don't actually reach, and so technology allows us to leapfrog all these layers of the system and create a direct relationship between the point at which taxpayers' money is being released to the point at which the taxpayers' money reaches the rightful beneficiary. But what that technology also does is that it allows for a very, by cutting out the intermediaries, it allows for a very centralized structure of delivery that makes it more amenable to direct political attribution. Think about old schemes, like schemes before technology. India's federal structure is designed such that any scheme that a government of India were to launch, even if it is largely funding it, the implementation has always been the responsibility of the state. So you needed the layer of the state and the structure of the state to ensure that welfare schemes are actually implemented and delivered on the ground. In the world of direct benefit transfers, you don't need those layers. So a scheme can very quickly become a Pradhan Mantri ka scheme, a prime minister scheme, in which you can directly create that attribution to the party leader. If you look at election data, you can see how this is playing out, right? Lokniti used to be the longest standing database of voter behavior, and in 2014 and 2019, Lokniti asked a set of questions about credit attribution for scheme benefits. So they asked the voter, who would you attribute the benefit to? You can see between 2014 and 2019, you can see the difference, that attribution, which used to kind of vary between state center, state chief minister, central chief minister, panchayats, local officials, etc., is slowly getting much more centralized. Because in the world of direct benefit transfers, you don't need the intermediary, and it becomes much easier to brand and project the scheme as a Modi ka scheme. And that centralization of attribution kind of tries to construct a very different relationship between politician and voter, not one of which is a relationship where the politician can present herself or himself to the voter as a kind of benign, benevolent patron who is giving welfare. Rather than, and if you see, how we've been talking about who is the beneficiary, we use the word Labharti now. Labharti translates as a recipient. Yeah. So we're not talking about a citizen who is a rightful recipient of a benefit. We're talking about a Labharti Varg, a recipient Varg, that is a group that can be mobilized. Now, so it automatically creates a very a very different relationship and dynamic between politician and citizen. One in which the politician can cast herself or himself as his benevolent patron who is kind of delivering largesse to this Labharti. And that is exactly the opposite of what a democracy is meant to ensure. Democracy is meant to ensure that citizens, as active rights claiming agents, demand from the state, and the state is duty bound and obligated to deliver. That is the framework of rights and duties that shape the structure of the democratic contract. So I think DBTs, these cash transfers, are undermining this democratic contract. It's what I call in my research techno-patrimonialism.
Yes, I was
and you
going
can
to ask you
really
about that.
see patrimonialism because this is not about actual rights claim making of citizens claiming rights on citizens. This is about on the state. This is about the benevolent politician handing
So
over
it doesn't build
around,
on state capacity.
It
really.
doesn't
I mean,
build
if
on
you're
state
giving a
capacity.
free pass to the woman, great idea. But does it really essentially lead to a longer, sort of a safer ecosystem that we are talking about?
Well, you see, because of this it could. I mean, in theory, look, there's a lot of, we have a lot of evidence on the table from across the world, actually. Cash transfers are not unique to India. They have, in the last 20 to 30 years, a kind of built up in many other parts of the global south. They're a critical piece of what the welfare state looks like in many developing countries. I think but I think by its very nature, because it isn't about investing in a public system, investing in a healthcare system, or investing in an education system, it is about delivering cash. It lends itself to this kind of patrimonial relationship between leader and recipient. The data and evidence that we have available to us certainly does give us some indication of what cash transfers can do. It enhances intra-household bargaining power for particularly where the recipient is a woman. It potentially ensures, frankly, in a context where employment is limited or employment opportunities are limited. It ensures a certain amount of cash in hand, which is crucial for poor families. But it also allows them to make certain kinds of household decisions that they may not have been able to make without that cash, especially in the context of limited employment. So there are definitely broad benefits. However, when you have a political context which allows for you to create this patrimonial relationship, the announcements of these transfers are not part and parcel of a broader vision of what kind of society we want to build or what kind of economy we want to build. It has acquired what we call a compensatory logic. It's almost as, because I do not want to create a politics that engages with and mobilizes around these bigger ideational issues, I am compensating by giving this cash transfer. And linked to this is the question of the Indian economy that just is not generating enough jobs. And we know from survey after survey, or you have been in the field, as have I, anybody, frankly, you just have to step out of your home to be palpably able to see that one of the biggest challenges that India confronts is that it is an economy that has been growing at 6 to 8% for the better part of the last 20, 30 years, but has simply failed to generate jobs for the masses. At which point, no politician can go to the polls without having something to offer. And since we do not have a larger vision for an economy that creates opportunities for all, we have begun to offer these compensatory cash transfers as something that can help tide you over. It's a palliative, it's not a solution.
You know, Bihar is a very interesting case in so many ways. And I returned to Bihar to cover these elections after 10 years. I was there last in 2015. You've also written about, your impressions from the 2010 visit compared to now. But in one way, you had Nitish Kumar focusing on women voters, and I'm shifting the subject a little bit now towards women voters in particular. Since 2007, when he launched the Jivika Didis or the self-help groups, whether it was giving cycles to young girls, students, and he kept working on it. So it wasn't something that just happened overnight in terms of the women voters and the loyalty towards him. On the other hand, when you also look at this cash transfer scheme of 10,000 rupees, at the end of the day, it does raise a valid question that will it help those families in dealing with the migration crisis of the men going out of the state to work mostly as daily wagers, as blue-collared workers, really. So there is that inherent contradiction in what is happening there. So how do you define the choices that women there are making? Would you say they're really, did you find them more informed this time, that they knew the names of the MLAs, or they knew who they were voting on based on some promises or vision? Or is it really these one or two, agenda of cash money that's coming in that is driving how women are voting?
Look, I didn't visit Bihar this time around, so I can't speak specifically to Bihar, but I think you're still posing an important question. I think that there are multiple factors that shape how and why people vote. And certainly, one element of that is a loyalty to a particular political party or a particular political leader, but also a sense that that particular political leader has delivered, has shown that they can deliver something, and in that delivery, there is a wider recognition that this contributes to improving my life, and I would like to reward and see more, right? So that is part and parcel of what is a dynamic negotiation. And I think in Nitish Kumar's case, I would argue, is a little bit different to many of the other cash transfers that we have seen, say in Maharashtra, for example, that were also launched right in the on the eve of the election.
In Madhya Pradesh,
yes,
in
and the reason I say Nitish Kumar is different is because in some ways his politics, going back to his first kind of phase as chief minister, his politics began very much around the idea of creating around mobilizing for building empowerment for women. And you could see that in that first phase. So Jivika was a very, very important effort at actually creating ground up community organizations for women. And we have a lot of evidence to tell us how effective that has been in building certain amount of agency, economic empowerment at a basic level, strengthening intra-household bargaining power. Actually, none of those things should really matter as much as it gave women a site and space where they could spend time with each other and where they could feel, where away from the drudgery of your everyday life, you also have a place where you engage with your peers, and that's a very important part of what it means to build solidarity and strength in society. The Jivika Didis were all over. That was the biggest thing that I noticed in the early days of traveling and working in Bihar, is that you saw over time how village after village after village there was a Jivika Didi as the primary community mobilizer. Investments in education, the fastest drop in out of school children for girls took place in Bihar in between, I think, 2007 to 2010, on the back of a very focused campaign, and including the cycles that then spread to many other parts of the country, and enhancing reservations from 25% to 50% in local governments. So almost like education, which we know is a critical pillar of building empowerment, economic empowerment and agency through Jivika, and political empowerment through through increasing reservations in local governments. And so that kind of really became the fulcrum. And the challenge that Nitish Kumar faced, or rather the challenge for the government in Bihar, having made these initial investments, was on how to build that to fundamentally reshape structural factors that make it hard for women and other more marginalized segments of society to actually challenge these structures of power and live for, and in that process explore and exploit their own potential. That challenge is you can get to level A, and through that level A certainly demonstrate your commitment and capability, and therefore extract loyalty from your voters on the back of what you have achieved and what you have shown you can do. But getting to the next level is harder. And I think what has been really disappointing to me is that instead Nitish Kumar goes now for his fourth election. The JDU offers not a new and bigger, more ambitious vision of a genuinely empowered society for women, but really 10,000 rupees, which is not nothing. I'm not taking away from that. But it certainly is a very limited ambition.
Yeah, in the context of Bihar's GDP, that 10,000 rupees perhaps holds the significance of what a 2 lakh rupees would for us. It's as important there. But I hear you, and I think that these are questions that we really have to think about whether these are only one-off sort of really events related to elections, or are they really helping build a stronger ecosystem and a state capacity as well when it comes to true governance? Which does bring me also to the questions, Yamini, about women's participation as an electorate and as leaders. And why I ask this is, in Bihar, of course, the entire focus was also about how women outnumbered the men. There were almost 71% women voters, 63% male voters. Women voters have actually, I think, in the last 15, 20 years, outnumbered male voters across states in India. There may be odd exceptions. But if I were to cite certain figures, and this is from an article in The Diplomat by Khushbu Srivastav and Pulkit Bhutan, which looks at how Bihar also witnessed the lowest number of women candidates in 15 years. So I'm just throwing some numbers here from that article. There were 2,357 men candidates, only 258 women candidates. So the NDA, it fielded 35 women, which is 14.4%. The India bloc, the opposition bloc, fielded 32 women, which is 12.16%. Jan Suraj, which was the new entrant, it gave tickets to 25 women. So the last assembly election, if you see, there were 370 women, which was a 9.9% for women candidates in that election. That was low already, and this time you have it even further lower, which is 9.8%. So while so much of talk and focus is on women as a voting bloc, schemes for women, but it doesn't really translate into women representation, does it, into direct politics?
We know that one of the most important ways in which we can really reimagine gender power dynamics in society is through genuine economic empowerment, right? At what point in all these cash transfer schemes have we talked about female labor force participation? Have we talked about building a genuine care economy, which we know is one of the most fundamental constraining factors that prevent women from becoming active economic participants? In fact, the bulk of female employment, you will consistently hear in Bihar too, that you see relatively, that we are seeing some improvement in female labor force participation rates year on year, but bulk of that improvement is on account of women working in agriculture or own enterprise and self-employed, which is essentially being either subsistence agriculture or working to support a small family employment, which is really just basic subsistence. And in order for us to be able to change this, we need to be imagining, we need to be thinking and debating the constraints for women in actual participation in the economy. We need to be thinking about what are the kinds of jobs that we need to generate for women. So, for example, Tejasvi Yadav says in response to the scarcity of jobs and the economic challenges of the region, one government job in every household.
In every household which doesn't have a government job.
Yeah. Now, there was lots of debate in the public about, is this fiscally feasible? This is such an absurd promise. But you know what? You could imagine that he could have actually been more imaginative about it if women's economic empowerment was genuinely at the heart of how we were thinking about our politics, by saying we actually do need a lot more women in the care economy, which we can employ as government, that would create more opportunities for women to participate in the economy, which will generally be positive. Similarly, for the 10,000 scheme to buy and sell some vegetables or buy one more bakri, instead, if you could say we actually want to build a robust care economy, and India has really good examples of this. The Anganwadi worker, the Asha worker, the A&M worker are all pillars of what governance in villages are all about.
But they're all out on the streets all the time. They're not getting paid.
So they all should be paid more. And we need much more investments in childcare, investments in roads, in street lighting, so that mobility becomes easier. All of these are factors that would actually contribute to economic empowerment, which brings me also to the issue of representation. As you rightly say, for all this talk of women's empowerment and cash transfers and women's participation, women have been cast largely by the very politicians that seek to mobilize women as political actors, as passive agents. I will give you cash, you come out and vote for me, is essentially this very transactional logic that women voters are not asking for. It is what politicians are choosing to offer. Women will take what they get. In that sense, I will have to vote in accordance to the things that are being offered to me. But that is what we have limited what politicians are seeking to offer. And instead, we are doing absolutely nothing when it comes to genuine representation. So ticket distribution, as you rightly pointed out, actual representation, even in cabinet, is another important indicator. I forget the exact number, but I believe that there are very few women, lowest number of women in the cabinet that has just been announced for Bihar. These are very critical issues. Same thing, by the way, you may recall, it's not just a Bihar specific issue. You may recall that just before, on the eve of the 2024 election, a special session of Parliament was organized to pass the women's reservation bill. That one moment when, in a very polarized polity, we actually managed to get political consensus across multiple parties. And if you look party after party that voted for this, their actual ticket distribution to women was in fact, it was reduced compared to. We are very, very far away from really talking about a politics of genuine gender equity. We have restricted ourselves to a public debate of tokenism, in which this conversation of cash transfers and freebies, where we began, because we have started talking about words like freebies and bribes, we have narrowed the space even further, I believe, from really creating a public discourse and through that a public consensus around some of these issues. And maybe that is on us as members of society, that we have allowed this distraction to prevent us from really debating the hard questions. So this conversation with you, I think, is really so important because it's allowing us to go beyond the limits of what headlines have to say and really get to the hard questions that we should be thinking about.
Just the final question, and then I'll just ask one informal question. Do you really see anything changing now? You've had the Modi-led BJP government in power for 11 years. There are a lot of questions about the wider federalism debate. But do you see a more bottoms-up approach happening in the days to come from a top-down approach when it comes to these kind of, governance and policy-making issues that are important also?
No.
Candid, what I can expect from Yamini.
No, I don't. I think there are three reasons for it. I think one, there is a natural political impulse in this, in the nature of the politics that we have now experienced over the last 10, 11 12 years now, that is naturally centralizing, and there's absolutely no reason why it will not continue to be centralizing, which is not to say that the BJP doesn't have very strong ground presence and very good feedback loops from the ground up. That is how they are able to, in such an agile way, consistently repair damage when public opinion starts swaying away or when voters start moving away. But its governance style and the political culture is deeply centralized. Its ideology is centralizing. I mean, the fundamental premise of federalism in India is that India has to be, in order to accommodate for the multiplicities of who we are as Indians, our ethnic diversity, our regional diversity, our religious diversity, a federal structure is essential, because federalism is about a politics of accommodation. It is a politics that allows you to speak Bengali and Hindi and English all at the same time. But Hindu nationalism is about trying to impose a homogeneous identity, and that is therefore just uncomfortable with the principle of accommodation that underlies federalism, and therefore it veers in the direction of centralization. And third is DBT like cash transfers, which are by their very architecture centralizing in their structure, which I'm not suggesting that I'm a total Luddite and that we should not deploy technology as tools to ensure that public services are delivered or that cash is delivered to citizens, and that certainly it might help in taking away from the middlemen and the corruption. But we do do have to ask what it does to accountability systems when public service delivery is about, is centralized into a server, and accountability for delivery is centralized into the benevolence of a party leader. But there is one thing I did want to say to you that is separate to this question, which is that there's a uniqueness to India. I've been spending some of my time in the United States in the last couple of years, and I was there during the election, the presidential election in 2024, and so much of the debate, even in the aftermath, was about how America is not ready for a female president. And the interesting thing about India is that it sits with all these paradoxes, right? Yeah. We've had a female prime minister, we've had multiple women chief ministers, and then and then the argument will be, well, many of these powerful women politicians tend to be members of families of powerful politicians. But look at someone like Mamata Banerjee, who's a fighter if there ever was. And yet, despite all of that, we have this very transactional politics that is seeking to take a very complex and important societal conversation on how to really shift gender relations and reducing it to yet another cash transfer.
That's a very important segue for me to tease that, in the next few episodes, you'll also get to hear powerful, feisty women lawmakers in this series. So make sure you stay tuned. And Yamini, before I let you go, how is life being a public policy researcher and a scholar? Is it frustrating? Is it boring? Is it you got to stay like really disciplined 24/7?
No, look, at one level, it's a constant learning, because I certainly believe the only way to be a public policy researcher is to constantly be both present on the ground, seeing and experiencing what the real world is, how policy translates into affecting lives of all of us. So I get to travel the country, I get to go to different places, I get to talk to a wide variety of people that I wouldn't in any other, perhaps journalism is another kind of profession that allows you that privilege. It also pushes you to be constantly reflexive, because if you can't accept dogmas and engage with policy, because there is just so much that is dynamic. After all, we are talking about complex social problems. If there was one solution to it, we wouldn't be in this world in the first place. And that reflexity, I think, is a really important and exciting thing, because you're constantly questioning ways of doing things. So it keeps me on my toes, and it keeps me very actively present in the world. And I feel like in that process, one also has some meaningful way of trying to contribute to society. But it's also a very funny time to be in the world of public policy, because across the world, this is not just an India problem, although we've been experiencing it for quite some time. We are in this moment of populist, semi-authoritarian, democratic politics.
You surely had a taste of it.
Indeed.
You've been hounded personally.
Which is very impatient with some of the main ingredients of what it means to be a policy researcher. That is, actually truth-seeking, right? Going out and trying to understand with as much integrity as you can ground realities, and presenting those ground realities using data and evidence to government. In an ideal world, there is a virtuous cycle between seeking truth, understanding, documenting, and and decisions that are made in the higher echelons of policy making. Of course, that's idealistic even in the best of times. We know that there are many other things that happen. But in these current times, this is really hard. It's hard because truth-seeking is often going to be critical. Criticism in populist governments is not something that is seen as a positive contribution that can make governments better. It's seen as an anti-national act. Data availability is a serious concern. Think about it. We're in 2025.
Let's not even get it started there.
Census is only going to come out in 2027. If that happens, last census was 2011. That remains a serious issue. And again, this is, in India, we've been experiencing it for a little bit longer, but it is now becoming increasingly a global phenomenon. Institutions of independence are seen as an anti-national drag, all kinds of means, from thuggery to more sophisticated means, to create both a culture of silence but also a culture of acquiescence. So in all of this, it's really hard to do one's job given that the environment is pushing back against it. And then there's a third thing. All good work requires resources. And those resources, there's been many problems with the world of global development aid, which funded and financed a lot of policy thinking. But those problems notwithstanding, there was a broad commitment to a set of global public goods that needed global support. And now, whether it is India or the United States, that space is going. So how do you do public policy when academic freedom, when independence of institutions, and when resources themselves are seen largely as pawns to support a particular type of politics rather than actively contributing to building an ecosystem of institutions that can contribute positively to society? These are big questions.
Oh God, and no easy answers there. So one advice to young policymakers and one advice in particular to women aspiring policymakers.
The best way and only way to do policy is to exit from your rooms and move away from your computers and go out in the field and talk to people.
Lovely.
I think if you cannot close your eyes and imagine what a village looks like, what a government school looks like, what a panchayat office looks like, what a patwari looks like, what a BDO looks like, if you haven't spent hours, days, years understanding and engaging with an open mind, because so much of what we think and intuitively assume as commonsensical actually can be upturned in all kinds of ways, we will not be able to build policy in any substantive way. And there's another thing I will say, which is very often in our discussions on policy, particularly in India, where we are so frustrated with a state that doesn't deliver, with politicization of everything such that we can't even breathe clean air, and data on AQI gets manipulated, that we keep looking for answers for good policy as something that can be insulated from politics. Actually, there is no such thing as good policy that is not part of politics. Policy is about building political consensus, and that requires all of us to consistently be engaged in a public dialogue about what we see, what we think, and what we do. So that's why it's called public policy and not just policy. So don't take away the publicness. And for all the women out there, talk to your fellow women across class, across spaces. We are all in this fight together. But often there'll be different priorities in that fight. So be patient. What you are fighting for as a city-bred young woman may be somewhat different to what a girl in a village in Kumbakonam may be fighting for. But the core principles are the same, and the powers and glass ceilings that we have to break are the same. So building collective solidarities across layers is really important. So don't forget that. Always reach out outside your comfort zone.
Those are fabulous advice to the young, and sisterhood really helps. And I always remind people that yes, when you are in a position of authority yourself, always remind yourself that you owe a responsibility to actually help out those next in line in whatever way possible. And I do remind my students, do not forget the public in the policy, like you just said. And in the initial remarks when we were talking about Tamil Nadu, it took me back many years ago when I had started off as a rookie reporter, and I'm dating myself here, I think 20 odd years ago, when Tamil Nadu in Sri Perumbudur, I was in Sri Perumbudur, and I remember going to talk to this woman in a village, and That village looked very pretty, clean. It actually does happen to be in most of southern India, even a lot of northern Indian villages today, where every hut had a mixer, a cycle, a television set. And this woman, I was trying to communicate to get a reaction on politics. And she looked at me for a moment and she simply said, how much are you going to pay me for these comments? Because that's how they have sort of been, tuned that you get paid. That's not a free service. I'm talking to the media too. It took me aback. But from there to coming to a point where we are also talking about women as such important voting blocks. You mentioned Mamata Banerjee. West Bengal again will be a very, very important and interesting state to study what happens in the context of politics, governance, women voters, women participation, all of it. But this has been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Yamini, for talking to me.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure for me too.
So stay tuned for more enriching conversations coming in from women thought leaders, and do press that bell icon notification for future content alert. Thanks for watching. With video journalist Meharban, I'm signing off here. Take care. Goodbye.